am teacher Teresa. How are you today? In this video, I'm going to discuss active and passive voice of a sentence. Okay, let's get started. Active voice in most English sentences with an action verb, the subject performs the action denoted by the verb. Here are some examples that shows that the subject is doing the verb's action. Okay, the man must have eaten 5 hamburgers. So the man is the subject and eating is the verb. And the subject here is the one doing the verb. Another example, Marilyn mailed the letter. So Marilyn here is the subject and is the one doing the verb, which is mailing. Another example, colorful parrots live in the rainforest. So parrots here is the subject, which is the one doing the verb, which is living. Because the subject does or acts upon the verb, in such sentences, the sentences are said to be in the active voice. So here is passive voice. Passive voice, one can change the normal word order of many active sentences, those with a direct object, so that the subject is no longer active, but is instead being acted upon by the verb or passive. So note, here are some examples how the subject-verb relationship has changed. 5 hamburgers must have been eaten by the man. So the subject now here is hamburgers, which is being acted upon by the verb eaten. Another example, the letter was mailed by Marilyn. The letter is now the subject and mailed is the verb, which is being acted upon the subject, which is letter. Because the subject is being acted upon or is passive, such sentences are said to be in the passive voice. Okay, note, colorful parrots live in the rainforests cannot be changed to passive voice because the sentence does not have a direct object. So, to change a sentence from active to passive voice, we must do the following. Okay, number 1, move the active sentence's direct object into the sentence's subject slot. For example, Marilyn mailed the letter. So this sentence is an active voice. So the direct object here is letter. So to change it into passive voice, we will change the direct object as the subject. So number 2, place the active sentence's subject into a phrase beginning with the preposition by. Okay, here is some example. Active voice. Marilyn mailed the letter. So the subject here is Marilyn. So to become a passive voice, we will change it to become by Marilyn. So we added the prepositional phrase by to make it a passive voice. Number 3, add a form of the auxiliary verb be to the main verb and change the main verb's form. Okay, example, Marilyn mailed the letter. So the verb here is mailed. So it is in the active voice. So change it to passive voice. The letter was mailed by Marilyn. So we added the auxiliary verb the verb was added by the auxiliary was. So, the letter was mailed by Marilyn. So, it is now a passive voice sentence. Because passive voice sentences necessarily add words and change the normal doer action or receiver of action direction, they may make the reader work harder to understand the intended meaning. As the examples illustrate, a sentence in active voice flows more smoothly and is easier to understand than the same sentences in passive voice. Okay, here are some examples. Active voice. At each concert, the soprano sang at least one tune from a well-known opera. So the doer of the action is the soprano, which is the action is sang. So the receiver of the action is the tune. In passive voice, at each concert, at least one tune from a well-known opera was sung by the soprano. So the receiver of the action is tune, and the action sang, and the doer of the action is soprano. So it is now in passive voice. Another example, active voice. Asbestos abatement teams will remove large chunks of asbestos-laden materials from the hallways on the second and third floor. So the doer of the action is teams. The action is remove. And receiver of the action is the material. The asbestos-laden material is the receiver of the action. So to become a passive voice, here is the example. Large chunks of asbestos-laden material will be removed from the hallways on the second floor and third floors by asbestos abatement teams. So the receiver of the actions are the chunks. And the action is remove. And the doer of the action, the abatement teams. So the sentence now is in passive voice. It is generally preferable to use the active voice. To change a passive voice sentence into an active voice sentence, simply reverse the steps shown above. Okay, number 1, move the passive sentences subject into the active sentences direct object slot. So we will just reverse the steps. The letter was mailed by Marilyn. So it is in passive voice, and to change it into active voice, the subject, which is letter, we will change it to become the direct object. So Marilyn mailed the letter. So it is now in active voice. Number 2, remove the auxiliary verb be from the main verb and change main verb's form if needed. Okay, for example, the letter was mailed. So it is in passive voice and there was an auxiliary verb. Active voice, it will be changed to mail the letter. Number 3, place the passive sentences object of the preposition by into the subject's slot. Okay, passive voice. By Marilyn. So, object of preposition by is added in passive voice. So to become an active voice, to change it into active voice, Marilyn mailed the letter. So we remove the preposition by. Because it is more direct, most writers prefer to use the active voice whenever possible. The passive voice may be a better choice, however, when the doer of the action is unknown, unwanted, or unneeded in the sentence. For example, the ballots have been counted. Sometimes our efforts are not fully appreciated. So these are inactive voice sentence. Another, the writer wishes to emphasize the action of the sentence rather than the doer of the action. For example, the high jump record was finally broken last Saturday. A suspect was questioned for 16 hours by the policeman. So it is in it is in active voice. The writer wishes to use passive voice for sentences variety. So active form. In active sentences, the thing doing the action is the subject of the sentence and the thing receiving the action is the object. Most sentences are active. The professor teaches the students. So the professor here is the subject or doing the action, and the verb is teaches, and the object or the receiver of the action is the student. Passive form. In passive sentences, the thing receiving the action is the subject of the sentence, and the thing doing the action is optionally included near the end of the sentence. You can use the passive form if you think that the thing receiving the action is more important or should be emphasized. You can also use the passive form if you do not know who is doing the action, or if you do not want to mention who is doing the action. So, for example, the students are taught by the professor. So the subject here, which is the one receiving the action, is students. And the passive verb is are taught. And the one doing the action is the professor. So the students are taught by the professor. So it is now in passive voice. So that would be all in our discussion for active and passive voice of the sentence. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.